So therefore, main hypothesis as to what causes, the confusion and sort of brain fog following a seizure. This is referred to as the post-ictal period, and during a seizure is referred to as the ictal period. So while it may seem like the most logical explanation, the post-ictal period is actually not due to using up the sodium gradient. The brain can still fire normal action potentials immediately following a seizure and even following status epilepticus. So while that might seem like the most logical or simple explanation, in this case it's actually not the correct one. So scientists have come up with 4 different hypotheses as to what could be causing the post-ictal brain fog, so to speak. And in reality, it's probably a combination of, the 4 of these things. So the first hypothesis is that neurotransmitters are depleted. So the way that neurons communicate in the brain is via action potentials, which I have abbreviated here as AP. So this is how they send signals to one another. So what happens is this neuron up here, which is referred to as the presynaptic neuron, the action potential travels down from the cell body, which would be somewhere up here, down its axon, all the way into the axon terminal of the neuron. And what happens is action potential, this comes down, and what it does is it causes voltage-gated calcium channels to open. So calcium flows in, and this triggers the exocytosis of vesicles, which is just a fancy way to say these kind of little balls fuse with the membrane, and then the neurotransmitters are leaked out into the cleft, and this is referred to as the synaptic cleft, or the space between the 2 neurons. So these neurotransmitters, which are synthesized in the cell body, so up here, and then transported down and sit in the terminal, they move across the cleft and bind to receptors on the surface of the postsynaptic neuron, and they help trigger an action potential in this cell. So this is how the signal gets transmitted. So it goes electrical signal to a chemical signal back to an electrical signal. So during a seizure, you have all this really heightened activity. So you're firing tons and tons of action potentials. So one theory is that you're using up all of these neurotransmitters, and so you can't send any more signals, which kind of leads to, the confusion and weakness, that happens during the post-ictal period. And you can't, the cell body can't synthesize new neurotransmitter fast enough, so you have depleted neurotransmitters, which is causing reduced signaling. However, the strength of this hypothesis is relatively weak because there are currently no direct evidence of this being true, although it is definitely a possibility. So second, more likely scenario is you have changes in your receptor concentrations. So these are some studies in rats that were conducted. So as you can see here in these epilepsy models in rats, immediately following a seizure, they have this kind of slow wave brain activity following a seizure during the post-ictal period. And the tool used to measure brain activity is referred to as the EEG. So here you can see kind of these like slow waves, right? So there's slow wave activity, and the rat is actually unconscious during this period. But then if you give them the drug naloxone, you recover normal EEG activity, and so the abnormalities are reversed and the rat is no longer conscious. So what is naloxone? Naloxone was originally developed to help people who are addicted to opiates. So opiates are used as painkillers, and some examples include oxycodone, Percocet, Vicodin, etc. And these all have kind of like a sedative or effect, which is just a fancy way to say they make you tired and kind of confused, similar to what epileptic individuals experience following a seizure. So naloxone actually blocks these opioid receptors. So this is an opiate, so we have, even though you have opiates, like exogenous opiates, which are like drugs that you take, your body also has naturally produced opioid peptides, which bind to our natural opioid receptors. So naloxone actually blocks this receptor, so this opioid can no longer bind and can no longer have its sedating or tiring effect. So it was developed so people who are addicted to opiates, they don't kind of get the high they would off of opiates when they take it, so it helps them kind of kick the habit, so to speak. So anyways, after you give the drug naloxone, you block these opioid receptors, the opiates can no longer bind, and you recover this normal EEG activity. So it's very interesting. So then studies in humans have shown that when naloxone is administered in between seizures, it increases EEG activity, which leads scientists to believe that opioid receptors are actually upregulated during a seizure. So you have increase in the receptors and increase in the opioids. And then what happens is following the seizure, those opioid receptors kind of begin to slowly decrease, but the patient still feels kind of sedated for a while during this postictal period. So as you can see here in this little drawing, like this might be what it looks like during a seizure. You have all these upregulation of all the opioid receptors. And then during the postictal period, you still have too many, and then it slowly goes back down to normal. So you kind of go from having a seizure to being really tired and out of it to slowly feeling normal again. But opioids have different functions in different regions in the brain. Have been shown to have both pro and anticonvulsant effects. So in some cases they can cause seizures, in other cases they can help prevent them. So it really depends on where they are in the brain and what they're doing. So while there is some strong evidence, it's not totally cut and dry. And so also interestingly, this might account for the postictal depression some patients experience. So they have these withdrawal symptoms where they feel really sad, and a little sad frowny face after a seizure, because just like when somebody's addicted to opiates and they stop taking them and they withdraw, they feel really crappy and sad. So it's like you're withdrawing because suddenly you're having a lot less opioid activity after the seizure. So this could be causing this postictal depression.